So a very warm welcome to this session, which I hope you enjoy and get some value out of. I'm certainly looking forward to working with you all for me this evening. A warm welcome wherever you are in the world. My name is Vincent Traynor. I'm based in Sheffield in the north of England. I'm going to try to, as I say, my best to make this an interactive sessions, but do feel free to put anything in the chat box. If you think it's worth it, just pop your hand up and we can have a conversation as we go, especially because there's only 6 or 7 of us. The whole purpose of this session is to explore what might happen if we try to converge the EMCC standards and competencies with the concept of executive education. And I'm aware that I'm aware that some of you may or may not be familiar with either of those two concepts, so I'll try to bring a little bit of explanation to those. But ultimately, I'm trying to see this as an exploratory session. I do have a firm interest in both of these topics. I guess you may have as well to some degree or other, because you've joined us today. But my overall goal is to see what emerges when these two areas overlap. I've done a little bit of preparation by way of this dialogue session, and to be honest, some areas of overlap were completely obvious, but other areas weren't obvious at all. And I've learned quite a bit by going through this process, and I hope that I learn more by going through this conversation with you folks, and I hope that maybe it will be of value to you as well. It's very much work in practice for me. I'm not trying to sell you anything or convince you of anything. It's very much a dialogue to explore and to learn. So these are the areas that I'd like to cover in particular, is try to get a handle upon what executive education is. And I'm totally aware that I'm probably approaching this from the perspective of a UK institution, a UK business school, which is part of a large university. But nevertheless, we'll try to get a handle upon what executive education is. We'll look at learners and their needs and their organisational contexts. I am going to be referring to a particular example, but I'm going to make it slightly generic that I hope will be broad enough to cover potentially your own areas as well. I want to look at we're going to allude to the notion of process and content in the delivery of executive education, and ultimately look to see to what degree EMCC standards can shed a light on and maybe challenge conventional approaches. My motivation for this, and it'd be interesting to hear your motivations. My motivation for this is twofold. The first is that my role within Sheffield Hallam is the development of our leadership development portfolio, particularly postgraduate and executive education. And I've been doing this actually for a number of years, but I'd like to get it right or better. So for me, there's a developmental angle to this. The second is that before I became an academic about 7 years ago, I had a truly horrifying experience where I, as a senior executive in an organization, I was part of some executive education led by a university, as it happens in the UK, and I found it truly dreadful. It was embarrassingly bad, and I guess I've been holding that as a juxtaposition since. To say to myself, okay, what can I do to make sure I go nowhere near that whoever comes on the programs always walks away with something, and that it gets a balance right, as I say. So that's sort of where I'm coming from in terms of my own professional background. So yes, I do work in the area of leadership development. I'm closely associated with the EMCC in the sense I'm a master practitioner. I've got individual accreditation as a supervisor, and I've been doing coaching and coach training for a number of years, but I've now very much moved into the leadership development space. So that's me. It'd be really good to just check in with you good folks and just see who we have on the line. I see Michael's got his hand up. Was there something you want to say, Michael, or would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, Michael Cullen from Montreal. I'm currently designing and will be facilitating a coaching program in an executive context at a university here in Canada in a business school. So of course this has great interest for me. As much as we can learn about the great things that work, I would put up my hand because I just wanted to get an idea of what are some of the 2 or 3 things that you took away from that bad experience that we should be alert to.
Well, maybe I'll try to pick those up as we go through.
Sure.
But yeah, let's pick those up. Thanks. Good point. Let's pick those up as we go through. Would there be maybe 1 or 2 other people who'd be happy to just introduce themselves? Actually, why don't we go around everybody and say a quick hello? That would be lovely to make that connection. There's an order on my screen. Maybe we could go around that order. Would that be okay? Anne, would you mind going next, please?
My original background was as a psychotherapist, and then I became a trainer of psychotherapists and many years ago, and over time a trainer of coaches. And that was I didn't work for Middlesex University, but our programs were validated by Middlesex. But then I began to want to get out more into the corporate world. So I moved to being a consultant to GlaxoSmithKline, the big pharma company. And we designed and developed in-house coach training and also a coaching for effective leaders. So that was a leadership coaching training that was for leaders, which was really about helping them build more self-awareness and coaching skills. And I was doing that, I suppose, for about 8 years, loved it, across the globe. So it was fascinating to see how different cultures responded to the material. And recently, Glaxo stopped all of their trainings. They've got a new CEO, so it all stopped. But I was fortunate to do some work with IMD, the business school in Lausanne in Switzerland, and I'm working as a coach on their leadership training there. And again, it's very interesting. I wish I was actually coaching, face to face, but it's called narrative coaching that I'm doing with their students, which I enjoy a lot. So I came here really to maybe learn more about that. And I'm also currently training in-house coaches in the House of Commons and introducing the coaching for effective leadership, unfortunately, not to Johnson or anyone like that, but for the people that work for the MPs, because they have a very, very hard time. So I'm interested in leadership and what does it mean, and I'm interested in coaching. So that was what attracted me to this event tonight.
Great, thanks, Anne. Pearl, would you mind saying hello and maybe a little bit of your background?
I'm more of an ICF trained coach at a UCC level, and EMCC just an individual accredited practitioner. What I do currently, I'm a certified executive coach. However, I've coached more of those in transitions. That's exactly the people I've been attracted. I'm also a faculty in a coach training school. Why am I here? I'm here so that I can get to know more with regards to EMCC. And I've also had the opportunity to more of mentor some school teachers. That's at the secondary level. So I believe joining this particular session, at the end of the day, I will learn 1 or 2 things that may help me in what I'm doing currently. So I'm from Nigeria.
Thank you, Pearl. It's really nice to meet you. Manuel?
I'm Manuel. I'm from Portugal. My background is from the business world, a little bit about all some countries. I'm the founder of the MCC Portugal and the current president. I'm always I'm the president of the Portuguese Mentoring Association too. So my field is more mentoring than coaching. But I'm very interested in the relationship between the companies and the universities. And now here in Portugal, we have a process, very complicated process to reach the coach as coaching as a profession. So we made an alliance with ICF Portugal to join efforts for to reach that goal, and we need to engage universities and the government to reach that goal. So I'm interested in that.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess underpinning this next session is all about how business schools, which are part of universities, certainly in the UK, bring the executive education thing to life. Claudia, do you want to say hello and just give us a brief background?
Hello, everybody. I'm also based in the UK. I work at a rival business school.
Good.
to Vincent. Oh, well, I'm just hoping, Vincent, you're not going to tell me you're an alumni and it was us that you had the awful experience with.
I imagine not. Where are you based?
I'm at Nottingham Business School.
No, the answer is no, it wasn't there.
Thank God for that. And I oversee the postgraduate taught personalization. So that means basically all the personal professional development of the postgraduate taught students is my responsibility. So I am a platform module lead for our 700 postgraduate taught students. As of August, I took responsibility for overseeing the exec education, extracurricular activities. So at the moment, I'm sort of working through a program of masterclasses to support them. I am also an academic mentor to postgraduate taught, and that's how I got my EMCC practitioner accreditation through the mentoring I've done for the last 12 years in higher education. I've just started coaching, so I oversee the academic mentoring program in the business school as well for the postgraduate taughts. And I'm also an academic mentor for our exec MBAs, which also involves, as you know, Vincent, the SLEMDA, so the degree apprenticeships. So I was interested in coming to this really to sort of listen to maybe what you were doing at Sheffield in terms of how EMCC standards could align with the KSBs of the CMI. So that's the Chartered Management Institute for those that are unaware, and the KSB is the knowledge, skills and behaviours, which the exec ed students have to evidence through an e-portfolio. And I'm interested to work, and I'm also interested in getting us closer aligned with the EMCC anyway in work. Yeah. So I'm trying to see, how can we link the exec eds, KSBs, and the actually, the attainment of the degree apprenticeship more with the MCC standards. There's got to be, there's a lot of talk. If you look at the competencies and what the KSBs are looking for, there's a lot of crossover. So I'm quite interested, Vincent, in what you're doing at Sheffield and what we might actually learn from each other.
Yeah, great. Well, if we don't cover it now, let's have a follow-up conversation.
Yeah.
Claudia.
Yeah, nice great. Yeah.
I'm conscious of time. And what if we get Liz and Jana to introduce themselves, and then maybe we can come to Andrew and Anthony as the session proceeds. Would that be all right? Just so we can get some movement on the dialogue itself. Liz, would you mind giving a brief introduction, please?
Very, very quickly. Thanks, Vincent. So my background's in organisation and leadership development. And in my sort of previous corporate career, I've worked in partnership with a number of the business schools developing leadership and executive management education programs. The last 20 years, I've run my own coaching and mentoring and consulting practice. I'm master practitioner, EIA accredited with the EMCC. And most of the coaching work I do today is with the senior people in an organisation tasked to deliver the business change agenda. But it's where coaching is always an embedded part of a leadership or executive education and development program. So obviously, Vincent, really interested to be on this session with you guys tonight. And curious about, your challenge around finding the right balance between process and content. So, yeah.
Thanks, Liz. And it's great to have you with us. And I think the embedding of coaching in our executive education programs is central to this session.
Yeah.
So you're right. You're right to name it. Is it Jana or Yana?
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Jana. It's from Czech Republic, ICF. I work as a leadership and executive coach at PCC level as well. I also work with students at school as pro bono. Here in Czech Republic, I go to many EMCC events because I enjoy discussing topics and finding out different perspectives. And unfortunately, my English isn't as wonderful as I'd like it to be. I often need to use a translator, so this is why. But I'm looking for this session. Thank you very much.
Well, it sounds perfect to me. And it's really nice to meet you. Andrew and Anthony, do you mind if we do your introductions as we go through? Would that be okay? Just to get some movement on the material. Hope you're not offended by my suggestion there. So yeah, great. Just definitely worth spending the time getting to understand your perspectives. And so yes, it's all about that overlap. What can the thing on the right-hand side learn from the thing on the left-hand side, and maybe vice versa? But it's mainly the flow from the standards and competencies through to the executive education. So as to some starting points then for the conversation. So just to locate where I am and what we're up to. So I'm part of Sheffield Hallam University. We're a very large university in the north of England. I think we've got about 33,000 students. We're very much an applied university. It's all about transforming lives. You can see there on the slide the different areas that we do that, both through our undergraduate and postgraduate students, as well as our executive education folk. I'm part of the business school, and those are the sorts of areas that we work in. Sheffield, if you haven't been here before, or if you don't know where this is, it's in the north of England, and it's an incredibly beautiful city. And it borders an amazing national park called the Peak District. And it's very green and it's very beautiful, and the people are very friendly. But like most places of sort of post-industrial, it has really suffered through COVID. And so the vast majority of organizations that we work with in Sheffield Hallam are in the SME category. That would be small and medium enterprises, so small businesses. I think it's up to about 100 people per organization. And so we very much have a mission to support all organizations within our geographic area, but in particular working with people in the small business community. And so we have tailored practically everything at executive education, well, probably 80% of what we do at executive education level towards the SME market. And we're part of a whole bunch of programs, such as the UK government's Help to Grow management program that some of you might have heard of, that Claudia, indeed, you might be part of. So in terms of your own starting points today, we've obviously got a sense of where you're coming from. Just give us a show of hands as to how familiar are you with the EMCC standards and competencies and the areas around team coaching. So there's some awareness. Anthony's maybe 50-50. Well, let's work on that. Let's work on that basis then. So first of all, some views on executive education. So I thought I couldn't do this without throwing in some definitions, if only to challenge my own starting point. And I'll let you just look through them yourself. We've got one there from Hura, a second from the Journal of Executive Education, the third from Top MBA website, and the fourth from Wikipedia. I'll just let you take a look at those for a few seconds and just see if anything jumps out at you that's of interest, that maybe is a surprise or you'd like to challenge in any way? Yeah, Liz?
Yeah, the second one, Vincent, I kind of like, the responsibility, the learning journey, the direction of the journey, it largely rests with participants themselves. That really resonates with, kind of encouraging people to be in the driving seat of their careers, their working life, and taking personal responsibility for that. And I think certainly my experience working, in the exec education space, it's around, two key things really: understanding the context that you're in and understanding yourself within that context. And that's where I've found where coaching is embedded, that equips the exec to get in that driving seat with a greater degree of confidence. And I think what I'm noticing is it's the coaching that plays a pivotal role in participants being able to leverage the value of whatever the rest of the content is.
Yes, I would agree with you. But let's hear any other thoughts there.
What comes to mind, and it sounds quite negative, but it's not meant to be, is that the traditional business schools are getting quite bad press at the moment. You read that it's not worth doing an MBA or an EMBA anymore. And I think people are challenging the value of it. And I think it may be because there's not been enough, attention paid to the preparation of the person themselves at the level of their being. And that links to what Liz was pointing to. I think that coaching alongside the other things they're learning really helps them to be able to self-reflect and to gain greater self-awareness, because this whole thing of the shadow of the leader and what is the shadow that they're maybe casting even before they get into the business world is very, very important for budding executives or budding leaders. We only need to look at the government and see what often is happening there, where the shadow hasn't been paid attention to.
Yes, I would agree with that, and also Liz's take. By the way, I'm not positioning myself here as an expert in any way. I'm trying to take on the role of facilitator, but also throw in my tuppenny worth. And I'd like to link maybe what you've both said with Andrew's comment on the chat box. And I really don't like that the term executive education at all, because to me it implies executive. I don't know anybody who calls himself an executive. Even those who are executives are too modest to say that. It's just, and also it to me it implies a polarity, a splitting, indeed a psychodynamic splitting in the land of psychology, where business schools are the educators and the executives are the learners, and that speaks very much to a content-driven approach that I would rebel against.
Just to build on that, I also think it's a very 80s style term. It really is. In 2021, it just sounds very old fashioned. A lot of the modern work in leadership and management talks about a more human, more person led. Yeah. And executive is a title. Executive is a title. It's like I was teaching last week and students called me teacher. I said, don't call me teacher. My name is Andrew. I don't call you student. You don't go into an office and call your manager, hello manager.
Yes,
hello boss. You call people by their name. And I think I realize that, that's not, I'm not trying to be pedantic, but I do think it's got a very leaden attitude, executive. It sounds very, very superior. It sounds very hierarchical.
It does, and very, very. I will give you knowledge, and you'll be very glad to receive that. So yeah, this comes down to my take on the process and content debate is very much a process discussion. From my perspective, it's what Liz is suggesting. It is, and indeed Anne as well, is working with the individual before they've joined the program to help them locate themselves. And my language would be through the coaching around their role. Where do you find yourself here today, and working forward from that.
Well, the word that I've always used in my classes is the word professional.
Yeah.
And I always use the example of a dentist. How do you want your dentist to behave?
Yes.
How do you want your airline pilot to behave? And that's a mixture of skill and also human a human and an ability to work with people.
Yes.
That's what I think is a much closer to what, as coaches, I think we should be near, is that professionalism.
Yes, that's helpful, and there may be a euphemism for or alternative phrase, maybe the development of people in some form of role, trying to develop their professional practice.
But it's tricky, because if we look at the other side, if you're in the earlier image, I've come across coaches who are extremely arrogant and say, I'll only work with C-suite. And I think, what are you talking about? I'll only
I
talk.
hate that, Anne. I'm sorry. I've heard that so often, and it makes me cringe.
I know.
Because I believe we should be helping.
Everyone.
I actually think yes, and my personal practice, a lot of people early career.
Yeah.
Not people who are already earning 90, 150,000 pounds a year, but people who are early career.
Yeah. I think it's this hierarchy again that's in the coaching world that needs to be addressed, because I think what we're doing is helping people with inner leadership, and maybe to get a sense of inner leadership and personal mastery, I'd use, rather than, oh, I only work with C-suite. I just think it's madness. Sorry, a little.
No, I would agree with you. So we can talk around executive education. Typical participants, these are typical participants that we work with, just a huge range of professional backgrounds. So as I say, most of these are leaders of small, medium-sized enterprises, wide range of professional backgrounds, wide range of educational backgrounds, representing whole bunches of different sectors, whether they have confidence or lack confidence. They may be time-pressed, they may be skeptical, they may feel that their own business experiences aren't worthy of note. Whereas, of course, we would say that it's paranoid. It's paramount that they bring those experiences in. Just a picture from some theory. So from the IMD guide, some of you might be familiar with this, around where might individuals be trying to get their work with executive education, and what are they trying to do. So from the bottom left hand side, it's understanding development pathways. On the right hand side, it's corporate strategy. This doesn't completely land with me very well, but I thought I'd put it out there to share with you. The zone, I mean, probably every program that we work on would very much encourage the ZPD approach in service of individuals finding themselves, finding the role, finding the agency, finding the little thing that's going to get them moving, working within the scope of their authority, and then moving outside of their authority to what can they influence and shape, and how can they bring a wider, more transformational agenda to a space that might be quite reserved or defended. And then personally, I really like this model of Knowles, which looks at the characteristics of adult learners. I don't think it quite captures it for me, but I find it a very useful model to locate where they are probably coming from and what they are probably going to need as learners. So there were just some ideas around executive education. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as we go. We're going to move on, but is there anything fundamental that maybe be one person or group? Is there anything fundamental about executive education that you think is really paramount that we haven't touched on or skirted around?
Yeah, I think I would just add the role that the organisations play themselves, because if you go back to those definitions, that second one, where it says, the individual takes ownership for their own learning. Yes, that's true, but being in an academic mentor role where you do the tripartite in terms of the employer and the student themselves, and you go in, it's amazing how many organisations seem to, just because there's a levy that they could tap into, they just sort of email out and say, does anybody fancy, getting upskilled? And some people go, oh yeah, go on, then I'll do it. Yeah. And then they sort of throw them in, but yet they don't give them any, like the 20%, off, you know what I mean, the off work, the additional time that they need to give them to be able to actually do their very, very best. So it's a bit strange. They sort of choose these individuals to go to enhance the managerial and the leadership capabilities in the organization, but yet they are there's a fantastic very large organization, I'm thinking of, the space in Nottingham, but don't anywhere near support the individuals.
Yeah.
They just throw them onto, is anyone interested, and they get absolutely no support at all. So there's a part of executive education which isn't just about the learner that comes to the institution and what we share with them. It's about the organization appreciating the learning journey that this individual is on and giving them the support, because I think what we've started to see happen is, as you go through executive education, you do become enlightened, and then you're able to actually almost become a conscious observer of your own organization and think,
Yes.
well, actually, this isn't the kind of place that I want to be. So we're actually finding through the process of executive education, there's an enlightenment, there's a paradigm shift, which is actually causing some of the students to think, actually, you know what, I'm better than this. So the organization isn't retaining the talent, it's actually hemorrhaging the talent as it becomes
Yes.
more enlightened.
It's such an important point, and especially in the UK, where those sorts of programs, it is a funding requirement that they are mentored and guided through the program. Thanks, Claudia. Let's move on now to look at the organizational context, and maybe this brings in the organizational side that maybe Claudia's alluding to or referring to. So, and here I have a particular program in the back of my mind, but I don't want to name it. It's more just I think by going to the specific, I think it can be general enough if that's not a contradiction in terms. So I think that with most programs, and we'll call them exec ed for a minute, even though we're not entirely comfortable with that phrase, that the participants might be, executives and inverted commas, leaders or managers, all from one organization or from a number of organizations, maybe with some common characteristics, maybe by sector or by size, and generally it's where there is a sponsor or a funder. I've just been in a couple of my own examples there, who of an organization who's trying to invest, we would hope, in some executive education or in some of these programs in order to introduce some form of improvement or change agenda that will just result in maybe performance improvement at the organization level, certainly individual growth and development. Although I think, as Claudia is just pointing out, the connection between one and the other can sometimes be very tenuous. And I guess what that would speak to is maybe organizations putting people on executive education programs or whatever as a present or as something to keep them happy, rather than something where there's an active investment and where the organization themselves will benefit as a result. I've got a couple of examples here. I don't know if it's worth just sharing a couple, but with one, there's a funding body. They have defined the target outcomes. They define the curriculum materials. They have defined the funding criteria. And then we as a business school, and indeed other business schools, are then working to deliver that program to various cohorts, with a view there at the bottom of the page for those organizations for their businesses to grow and employment in their areas to grow and the economy to grow as a result. And what I think one of the dynamics there is that these programs take place, they happen within business schools, and the business schools have other agendas. And I think there can be often tension between what the business schools' other agendas are and the things in the exec ed camp, and they can rub up against each other in different ways, because I think they require often different things. And one example would be the area of assessment or the area of access to systems. It can be very different. And then I'll give another example of a large-scale coaching culture program I ran with Surrey County Council, and I think this maybe speaks to what Liz was saying a moment ago about the underpinning of this program was very much about individuals getting a better sense of who they were and where they were in their lives and where they want to be in their career journey, what makes them tick, and then looking at their leadership role, or the leadership role they were invited to move into, shall we say. This was part of a refresh, an organizational refresh. So it was about getting people to think about, who am I and what is this role, and how can I, indeed, do I choose to? And if I choose to, how can I bring myself into this leadership role? The idea of trying to find congruence between what I'm up to at work who I am and what I stand for, so that I can bring my my presence and all of me, you might say, to the role.
I think that's where what Claudia brought in is so important, that as the people ask themselves those questions, and maybe prior to coming into the business school, they have been aligned with the company's values, but they begin to waken up and they begin to ask big questions. So, of course, then the business school could land up at odds with the company.
Yes.
It's tricky. I mean, at GSK, for example, where I trained a lot of people in coaching, those coaches then became a threat to the organisation, which was really sad, because they were very good at the work they were doing, but they had access to leaders that, say, OD in the organisation and HR didn't want them to have. So they wanted to stop the whole coaching project, not because it wasn't working, because people were more engaged, they were helping, but the company was threatened by it.
Well, interestingly, this particular example with Surrey County Council, it was the opposite. The explicit mandate that we had as a change team, as a coaching change team, was, I mean, we didn't use the word, it would be too pretentious, but it was emancipatory. It was about helping people realize who are they really, and what is the job really, and do they want to bring themselves into that role. And so the logic was that if some people realize, you know what, people were saying, you know, I'm head of service, but you know what, I trained as an accountant and I've always wanted to be an accountant, and suddenly I'm doing this other thing that I never wanted to do anymore. We frequently referred to the Talking Heads song, Once in a Lifetime. And you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack. You may find yourself with a beautiful wife in a beautiful home, and you may ask yourself, how did I get here? It was that sense of, oh my Lord, where am I? What's going on? Can I clock where I am and what I need? And can I take control here? So interestingly, it was very much at that level. But I agree, not every program is the same. Andrew.
Just as a build on that, I heard an interesting, I think it was a podcast I heard recently, and it was discussing the fact that a lot of the issues in society about our obsession with ourselves, not any sense of duty, any sense of, the reality is it's lovely that coaching can be and I'm not a Marxist by any means, I'm a rampant capitalist, but there is this view that a lot of coaching is incredibly self-focused. It's incredibly what about you, rather than others. And so there is a danger, I think, with this, that it's all about me. It's all about me being my perfect self. And I think it's a genuine criticism of coaching, is that it's always about the individual. Am I fulfilled? Rather than, well, actually, what's your role to help your team or your business? And I think it's just an interesting challenge. I'm not saying that we should all be about living for other people. I'm not saying that.
It's a great point. So I have a view on that, but I may be talking too much in this session. What are other thoughts to that point?
Isn't that point dealt with on this slide by improve how I lead, support, and challenge others?
Mm.
I mean, that's the other side of it. If you're to take both halves, doesn't that answer you, Andrew, or maybe not?
I mean, as a coach myself, I take a sort of behavioural type approach and positive psychology. And one of the essences of that approach is that there's going to be tough days and tough weeks, and you don't just give up just because you're not happy personally. And I know it's a challenge at the moment, because so many people, human happiness and enjoyment is seen as their prime directive. Whereas, of course, as I'm sure all of you wise people here, if you study any philosophy or psychology, some kind of sadness and some kind of unhappiness is the human condition. But if we always focus on everyone has to be developing themselves.
That's Marxist, by the way, Andrew.
Well, I was thinking more of a positive psychology approach, but it is that sort of sense that should executive education be more about, your responsibility as someone who's what your role is, rather than your own personal satisfaction or personal development. It's just, I'm being a little bit argumentative here on a Monday night.
Not as far as I'm concerned. Anne?
I think it's both. I think that there's obviously a sort of moral imperative at one level in the way we coach. We're expecting that these people are having coaching in service of the sort of leader that they want to be. So I think that's it. I mean, it's not just coaching for coaching's sake. It's not just navel gazing. It's about how can we be in service to others alongside supporting ourselves. And I think ultimately that's what, if we call it executive leadership, has to be about, because these are people whom, how can we help people see that we can all make a difference in the world, even in a very small way? Each of us can do that. And definitely.
Sorry, Anne, I just want to check in with you folks. I had planned for there to be I wasn't sure how many people were going to be on the session, and I planned a breakout session towards the end. And what I'd like to get, just check in with you. I don't think it's needed. I think the richness of this debate means, if you're happy, I'd like to suggest we just proceed through what we're up to, because the conversation seems to me quite rich. Would that be okay with you if we see it more, we go at our own speed rather than, I see some thumbs up. And also just want to, in that case, that's great. In that case, I just want to encourage, if anybody hasn't spoken, especially if English isn't your first language, feel free to chip in, and don't let us dominate the conversation. So this is such an interesting conversation. Let's look at so maybe if there's a summary where we've got to, is that executive education is probably a good thing, but the labeling of it is questionable. Coaching is definitely valuable as part of that. My view is that it hasn't been part of that, and we could debate if that is the case and why. But that the dominance, there's a risk that the dominance might be on the individual and them being in a happy place. But I suppose the opposite also applies. There might be some type of coaching where the individual vaporizes, and it's all about the role and the performance and the outcome in a very scientific method sort of way. So maybe there's both sides of that argument. So I guess what I'm trying not to do is to throw my own view on you, more just to facilitate the conversation, if that makes sense. In terms of moving forward then, what I wonder, and certainly in terms of our experience in Hallam and this particular project I have in mind, is that we generally work with our folks, we generally work with our participants at one of three levels, and the three interact, of course. People generally join a cohort, so they're part of a cohort of maybe 20, 25 people going through these programs. We have taken a strong line as Sheffield Hallam that we will always have peer groups as part of those cohorts, and that we will train those peer groups to coach, either by watching us do it and then they just pick it up organically through osmosis, or where we actually train them and then they're up and running. And then the first level, of course, would be the individual level, and you could argue almost any interaction with an individual would speak to that, whether they're in a cohort or not. And the language we're using locally is that the person who's working with them, who might be called a facilitator in looser language, we're calling the development consultant. So this would be somebody who works with a cohort of people through a program, if that makes sense. And then, and what I accept is not every program has peer groups as part of it, but I guess I'm just laying out where we're coming from, which I hope is useful to you.
Can I ask a question there?
Sure.
Because it would change the dynamics. Some of the people coming are having their education paid for by their company. Do you also have people who pay for it for themselves, out of their own pocket? Because I found the people I coach at IMD, for example, the ones who were paying for it themselves had a very different attitude than the ones whose companies were paying.
So I'd be interested in Claudia's view on this, maybe others, but I think there's been a sea change in the last 2 years, where previously we would have been very much encouraging paid for CPD, continuing professional development programs. Now there is a huge amount of funded opportunities, and those opportunities would be where maybe where the individual needs to pay nothing, or their firm needs to pay nothing, or maybe where they would pay a contribution, maybe 10% of the total fees, which may be something in the region of £700, and that would apply to government programs as well as apprenticeship programs.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's probably UK wide, that area, which is a golden opportunity for us to get it right, frankly.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing, because I've been shocked that these students at IMD are paying £100,000 for the year doing the EMBA. And, you know, imagine an individual having to find £100,000.
Yeah.
That's crazy, isn't it, Vincent? I mean, that kind of money. I mean, I think we have a lot of international students on our full-time MBA, and some of those are self-funding. But obviously, I think the majority of our exec MBAs all are coming through the apprenticeship levy. So I think they are all a paid for cohort. But like I said, some of the full-time MBAs, particularly since we're probably 80% international on that, those are usually self-funding.
So to take it one step further, is it in Hallam, I think our mindset is, whether they're paying for it or not, there's some serious contracting to do at the start. And I think that was alluded to earlier, such that even if they're not paying for it, or maybe particularly if they're not paying for it, they need to be contracted with. And so what I'm finding in Hallam is that the coaching concepts of contracting in the way it's meant to be is being incredibly valuable. Let me move on to some slides, because we're covering it later on, but it is a feature. Let's move on. So just in terms of the standards and competencies, these are the EMCC coaching competencies for one-to-one practice that many of you will be familiar with. It's on the EMCC website. If you do any coach training, or if you want to become accredited as a one-to-one coach, these are the areas that you cover. We'll come to these in a second. And what I've done is, for the purpose of this dialogue session, I've simplified them into the following 4 areas, just for simplicity, just for today. And there's no incredible rocket science in what I've done. And clearly, in this sense, it is where the individual development consultant, keep using that language, development consultant or coach, is working with an individual on a one-to-one basis. The individual has an organization that they're part of, so it's explicitly system in its nature, and that system itself is part of an ecosystem, which is generally a commercial environment, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, there are a set of standards on team coaching. Just give us a show of hands. Who's familiar with the team coaching standards? Maybe what I suspect is you're more familiar with the one-to-one coaching standards than the team coaching standards. That'd be right. So I was lucky enough to be part of the standards creation body for these, and it was a fascinating experience. But it very much locates it in the system perspective, as you would imagine. And what's really amazing about it is that it doesn't just take the one-to-one coaching competencies and add something to them. It's not a delta on those. It was a complete re-examination of this, and we'll come back to these in turn in a second. But once again, here the client would be the system. It would be the organizational team, once again within their organization, once again within their wider ecosystem. And what I've done, which you may or may not find of value, is I've just said, okay, well, of those, so I've used the same categorizing simplified set that I did for the earlier group, and I've made it anyway. If I showed to you, you'll see what I mean. I've just made a mapping of, can you see what I've done there? On the left-hand side are the one-to-one competencies. And on the right-hand side are the team coaching competencies. And I've categorized them according to building the relationship, enabling insight, action and outcome, and self-role and own team. I think you probably get that as a concept. And I just did it to try to simplify things for today, and maybe sort of helicopter back from some of the detail.
And how would you differentiate between team coaching and group coaching? Because if it's an intact team and you're working with them, that will be very different from a group of people that are coming together and you're doing group coaching for them.
Yeah, well, if it's okay, I'd rather not get into that distinction.
Okay.
But I think I just really briefly, I think the standards have been created, and I hope I'm not doing them a disservice. I think they've been created more in a practical, business sort of traditional way of looking at a team. If you were the MD and you had a team of heads of, and I might come in and work with you and them to help you, I see the group coaching area, which I think the standards do speak to, but the group coaching might be more of a group relations take, more of a Tavistock take. So I wouldn't want to say that these standards completely cover all scenarios, but I think it goes a long way to it, and I hope I'm not doing it a disservice as I say that, Anne.
No, it was just that it often has made me think that the contracting, if you're doing team coaching, is vital, because if the people in the team, you don't maybe know who they are, if they don't contract for confidentiality, or that the stuff that happens in the team maybe doesn't go outside, people could get quite hurt. They can get, there needs to be a lot of trust built between them, I think.
You're reading my mind and you're intuiting subsequent slides. And but don't apologize, because that's such a good example. My worry, I don't know, was an anxiety in preparing this material today was, will I end up speaking the bleeding obvious? And you'll all sit there going, yeah, well, of course that's the case, But I think our brief conversation around has shown it's not always the case. It can sometimes be quite different. And so moving on from there then is, to what degree can those concepts, those simplified standards and competencies, this stuff, to what degree can that shed some light on how executive education, or whatever we're calling it, is done? Or to be more specific, can we apply those standards areas to the 3 system levels, and what might bubble up? And at the risk of stating the obvious, one-to-one coaching competencies clearly speak to the individual level work, and that would go as broad as that definition would invite. So, for example, if I was doing one-to-one work with a client, I would contract with them. I would create a safe environment. I would contain their anxiety. I would be thinking about psychological safety. I'd be wondering where they are. How do I find them? I'd be trying to use here and now awareness to help them get a sense of where their solid ground is. I'd be trying to clearly build the relationship and build the trust. All of those things that I suspect you would all be doing as well. And more, I'm sure. And then I think that the team coaching standards, to a large degree, play more into the peer group work and the cohort level work, but it's not quite on a one-to-one basis. And so what I'd like to do then is just if you just go, so each of those 4 areas, you can probably see where this is going. Each of those 4 areas. So build the relationship and manage the contract. That was the first one there at the top of the slide, if you get my gist. Mm-hmm. And then later on, we'll look at number 2, then number 3, and then number 4. So with number 1, which is building the relationship and managing the contract, I then said, okay, of those 3 system areas, what are some of the things that what would the language be? Any decent coach, any decent executive education person, or maybe, I don't know, these are the things that bubbled up for me, and you can judge their usefulness or their applicability. So in terms of number 1, building relationship and managing the contract, and here I'm drawing upon more intuitively, I have to admit, than a scientific, analysis. I'm just intuitively drawing from one into the other. So with number one, it's establishing. So this is whilst a cohort is forming, shall we say. So this isn't independent of the cohort or independent of the team. So there's a relationship between the three. So establishing personal program credibility up front. So they know that even if it's free, it's still worth it. And they know that they're going to be met by people who will meet them eyeball to eyeball, whatever that means. And I don't mean that in an aggressive sense. I mean that in the sense of adult to adult, I hope. Getting to know them and their organizations really well and respecting the pressures they may be under. I think it's very easy in a business school to underestimate how hard it is out there. Seeking to develop trust and psychological contract. At the peer group level, so this may be moments when, so peer groups would be groups of 4 or 5, maybe 6, together for an hour and a half regularly. In this case, they are facilitated by a development consultant who would form them into self-managed teams, getting them working independently as much as possible. So there'd be a team or group formation thing here going on, and in a sense, it'd be a process of getting them going, getting them doing work, so they learn how to do work, so they then become independent doing work, and that would mean establishing effective peer group and group norms around participation and mutual support. And then more of this later on. And then at the cohort level, it's building the contact and the contract between people at an interpersonal level and inviting collaboration across them all, engendering routines for that pedagogic flow of sharing, of giving some input, getting people to think about it, getting to think how they might apply it, getting them to think about how they might reflect upon that application, getting them to think about how they might share those insights in the room with us, but then when they go back to their organizations, applying it in practice and coming back and learning from that application. So that flow of plan, do, review through the whole thing. So that's one.
My sense in that number 2 is they need to be introduced to coaching skills because of the way they can work together with those. So the levels of recognizing that there's a lot going on maybe underneath the surface, yes, and then the levels of listening and the simple contracting about how they'll work together, because often they will start giving one another, they'll start mentoring. And that's fine, but they don't necessarily listen and coach the other person. So I think that learning those skills can be really useful, not learning to be a coach, but learning the coaching skills.
Yes, I welcome other people's views on this. So our take within Hallam is that on some programs, which happen to be apprenticeship programs, we have a policy of training them. This is on senior leader, to be more specific, Claudia. I know that so we train them how to coach,
right?
And then they're up and running. But we do that in the peer group setting. On other programs, we don't have time to do that. But what we try to do is to role model it in the room, and then kind of nudge them along the way. If somebody wants to do a bit of unbidden mentoring, shall we say, or get unbidden advice that isn't needed, we will just gently hush them up as we invite them to do more listening, to understand where the client is at that stage. So, but what other people's thoughts on? I guess the question there is, to what degree is it valuable for participants on such programs to be able to coach either directly or through osmosis? I guess because we're all part of this EMCC gig, we're probably all going to agree that coaching skills are important. Pearl, what's your view?
I just want to share my own experience, because I got coached through executive education while I was in the corporate world, financial services precisely. And so that was how I fell in love with coaching. But one thing that I noticed missing then was, after that training or during contracting, there is no place for what happens after the training. Are you going to train a champion, So you find out it's a question of, is it what you love? So you continue. So maybe after 3 months, 6 months, or a year maximum, some people, of course, there's attrition, will leave. So the institution will go back to where they started from. So what I expect to see is when you engage the founders or the executive management who, during the contracting, there's a need for them to agree with the consultant or the school what should happen next.
Well, let's move on then, because of a view on this. But as I say, I don't want this session to be all about my view. So I'm trying to strike the balance between sharing some thoughts, but also include the conversation. So tell me if I'm getting the wrong balance.
Vincent, sorry, can I just interject for a moment?
Yeah.
This that you do, is this embedded within their PPD module, or is this something that sits extracurricular to support the core curriculum? Where does I'm trying to work out sort of where this training, if you like, fits.
So on the senior leader apprentice, we did. Technically, it's part of the first module.
Okay.
But in practice, it sits between the first and second module. I'm really happy to have an offline conversation on the technicalities of the apprenticeship.
Yeah, okay.
Claudia, really happy to do that.
Okay.
So where Pearl has left us is sort of what happens afterwards, and I suppose there's an implication of, did they sign up for that at the beginning? Let's move through a couple of slides, if I may. So I think some underpinning principles there. The more participants understand and signed up to the program commitment, the more they will personally be invested in the work. The closer the relationship is with the development consultants and each other, the more they will feel at home, keep open-minded and experiment with new ideas. And our role modeling of contracting and relationships of trust will encourage them to do the same in their own organization. So there's something there as well. I thought I'd show a couple of commitment slides to help give you a sense of how we've been approaching this in the past. So this is on one of our SME programs. So this was our commitment to you. So we'll build effective working relationships. We'll help you open up. We'll provide you with concepts. From this, we'll help you plan and lead. We'll help you reflect upon the work that you do. So it's very much the pedagogy was very much work-based, centered around them, centered around their agency, centered around what they can do, but not positioning ourselves as the expert. If somebody in the room has got, well, frankly, as an expert in something, which is often the case, is to draw that in as a resource. And then separately, the commitment from them was to attend all sessions and basically engage with it in a way that, in a quid pro quo way, that we're inviting us to work with them, and we're inviting them to work with us, which is one about active experimentation, trying things out, learning as they go. So the second area then is enabling insight and learning. And here there's maybe a different take on those three areas. So this is different to the one I showed before. And here the starting point, I found the more useful starting point was in the middle. That's why that one's colored in green. So this is about enabling insight and learning. And this seemed to be getting to the heart of, at least for me. So number one, teach them to coach and role model good coaching practice in the small groups. See some heads nodding. So that seems, seek to build them as independent peer coaching teams so that over time they don't need us. And the hope is that after the program, they just keep working together as active peer groups, and to, where possible, to use the peer group environments to explore real life team dynamics. And we find that often bubbles up. People will say, well, I was planning to do this, that, and the other. And somebody else in the group will say, well, if I was working with you, I wouldn't want it done that way. I'd want you to speak, whatever. So try to bring that in actively. At the cohort level, then, is provide clear tasks for learning and application and encourage collaboration and collective sense making. The idea that there's 4, 5, 6 brains in the room, and if somebody's coming in with a challenge, we know we're going to listen to them and help them unlock their own potential. But at the same time, there can be quite tricky issues that people are working with. And at the sense making level, engaging the group to partake in the collective sense making can be incredibly valuable. And I don't mean necessarily finding the answer, because I think, as we would all agree, sometimes finding the question is the more important thing. Help them to apply their coaching skills in the large group for collective insight, especially if somebody has a tricky issue. We find that clearly, if there's 4 or 5 in the peer group, there's 4 or 5 in the peer group. But if somebody can share an example or a tricky issue in the large group, there's just more people available to throw in a different take.
You could say that those pointers are very similar to a supervision group, a sort of coaching supervision
Absolutely,
group.
yes. Yes, absolutely. And that would be, I guess that would be the backstage model that one would be working towards. And then the left-hand side, well, it's probably bog standard coaching stuff, but it still exists, because we're working with the one-to-one, even if they're part of a large group. So listening, empathy, the things there would be standard, apart from maybe exploring wider stakeholder agendas. But here, I was thinking about this next slide when we were talking earlier about role, and so this is our take upon it, and it may well be my take that I'm infusing in my colleagues, but I'll put it out there. It is that the role we're inviting people to do is absolutely critical, and I would draw upon the Grubb Institute's work of organisational role analysis, if anybody knows that, as my anchor point. But anyway, in this particular program, which has helped to grow management, we say to people that the program contents, the content will enable them to feel more knowledgeable, more skilled, more confident, and more networked. But they need to face into their evolving role. In other words, the role they need to have in order to pull off the thing that they need to pull off. So it's very much a role in transition. And can they attach themselves to the role that they need to be working to? Not 5 years out, but maybe 3 months out or 6 months out, that they can attach themselves to that and then see the coaching in service, to use the phrase from earlier, the coaching in service of helping them get to where they want to be. So their growth and development as a leader will enable something at an organizational level. And to be more blunt about it, we say to them is that organizational change will not happen unless they go through their own change, be that, whatever your language is, leadership or role or whatever.
And although you're based in Sheffield, what about the cultural differences? Because I have found that, say, teaching into China, for example, where the education system is so different, as children, that they are frightened of being asked questions. They see it as a threat. And also they weren't allowed to be curious. They had to learn rote fashion. So I suppose I'm wondering how you manage that in these sessions with groups. So
for us, the two cultural things here would be, number one, people in Sheffield and Yorkshire are very, very focused upon return on investment. So we have to be very clear what the outcome is, and we have to be very clear on, you will receive, on a recent program, 92% of people thought the program was excellent in terms of outcomes, given the money they put. The other thing is that, well, I don't know if this is a cultural thing or just one of our own objectives is to widen the recruitment to people who previously would not have gone to university. So we have to be very careful that we sell a clear message, and that we don't discriminate against anybody just because they haven't gone to university. Yeah, would be the two. I'll whistle through the next group. There's about 3 or 4, and then I'll stop, and we'll just have a general conversation as to where that's got to. So the third one then is action and outcome orientation, and here it's all about action, of course. And Pearl is reminded of that a second ago. So it's been about here. I think the starting point for me was on the right hand side. It was around the cohort level. So establishing the expectation that they will grow and the organizations will change. Sharing simple plan, do models. So inculcating the notion of change and trying things out. Then on the left hand side, encourage them to, this speak very much to the system perspective, encouraging participants to explore the wider system. Who are the stakeholders? Who else do they need to involve, both within their own organization or broader, maybe in the supply chain? And then at the peer group level, it's scenario planning new projects and using mobilized participants to energize those who may not be mobilized in a sort of if he can do it, if she can do it, so can I sort of way. And when we use this very loose model to try to get a sense of, we would never label anybody, but we would in our minds be thinking, is somebody on the left-hand side resistant, reluctant, defended, held back? I'm here, but I'm not really here. In the middle, it might be people who have found the energy and authority, but maybe within the constraints of their own role. And then on the right-hand side, it's people who are reaching up and above, outside the technical authority that their role would give them. So that's that in terms of action and outcome orientation. But I wanted to share this final one with you, because this was the area where personally I got more insight from doing this exercise. You might have a different view. It was about looking at this fourth area of self and role and their own team. And what at the risk of stating the obvious, if you're working on an executive education program in a business school and you're working as a development consultant, you'll be working with participants, you'll be working with cohorts, and there'll be a range of people around you in support of you. So there might be business development colleagues, there might be customer facing colleagues, there might be admin, and that you may have senior colleagues, maybe deans or assistant deans, or somebody who's maybe overseeing the work in some regard, somebody who may or may not know what this is actually all about. And I can probably move on from that. I'll just jump to some conclusions, and then we can maybe stop and just have a chat about it. So and here, what I was looking to do is build a resource for our development consultants. So there was a very practical outcome I was trying to work towards at this stage. It was, if we're looking to bring on new development consultants, so these are academics who will also become a development consultant. Some points: craft a development consultant professional identity, which is different to your academic role. So to see the two things as very different roles, and the enactment of that work being enacted through two different roles. To seek development, which we're trying to do in Sheffield Hallam, to write a professional profile that brings that role to life. So it downplays the research, it upplays the professional practice and the working with execs, whatever. Let go of any need to convince them of your content knowledge. You're there to support their relationships, their insights, their experimentation, and their outcomes. Your role will be helpful to them in this regard. So the role is more of a process role than a content role. Get close to them, learn about them, and share some of you. Come across as competent enough, but it's okay to say you don't know, which I think also runs counter to a traditional academic role, potentially. Notice it's common to feel anxious in this role. You may be feeling incompetent, out of your depth, needing to be the expert, feeling a need to assess their work or judge it. This is particularly common at the start of the program when they're new to the role. And then finally, if they're picking up groups' feelings, they may be feeling something that isn't actually to do with them at all. They may be picking up something to do with the group, in which case they need to discuss that with a supervisor or somebody else close to them, or maybe within the team. And then the final thing I'll show, I'm conscious I'm talking a lot right now, was I was trying to get a handle upon what would a definition of this development consultancy role be. And I thought, if I was a development consultant, it would be the support informed by a range of coaching principles. So coaching is completely there, provided to executive education, or whatever we call it, program participants at the individual, peer group, and cohort level in order to develop their insight and motivation to realize their individual and organizational outcomes. So I realize I talked a lot there only because it's 1920. Let me just sort of stop there and just get your thoughts and reactions to anything I've said, adding or challenging.
So I'm just looking at the last sentence here, that the group and the cohort level, in order to develop their insight and motivation to realize their individual and organizational outcomes. So I'm looking at it's the program outcome should be based on organizational requirements.
Yes, largely, yes. Andrew, you put your hand up. Very polite.
Yeah, just as a challenge, I'm saying this as polite as I can.
Yeah.
I'm very adamant I'm not an academic. I've had a 25-year commercial career. I just happen to do lecturing and run modules at some universities. The challenge to this, I think, it came across recently, is that there's a danger that, and this can apply in coaching and some marketing. There's a lot of people who are very academic, but they haven't actually had, to be blunt, real world experience.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered, so something that came up recently is this idea of reverse mentoring. So, for example, if you're a lecturer or a tutor, you know what, it might be good to sit down with an undergraduate and them to actually tell you what it's like to be a 19 or 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Rather than me telling them about marketing and business or coaching. And I wonder whether here, because you've got a very specific community of SMEs, I wonder how many of your, not being cheeky, but how many of your academics really know what it's like to be an SME?
Well, it's such a good point, and I did skirt over that, but I think this comes back to my bad experience that I alluded to at the start. So we're lucky in Sheffield Hallam, Andrew. We're an applied university. We're all about transforming lives. The agenda is all interventionist. Well, 90% interventionist, and most of my colleagues have got senior level corporate experience and
right.
experience as well, as have I.
Yeah.
But not everybody has, and even some who do have, it might have been some years since they've done it, and they might have kind of lost touch with what that reality is.
I wonder whether there's room for a buddy. Sometimes there's a room for, the buddy type, a buddy system in workshops and seminars. I'm wondering whether there could be people who've gone through the course previously, could be brilliant buddy or almost like mentors.
Yeah, and we would do some shadowing. Around that. I think my bad experience, I promised to come back to that, was stemmed from the fact that I think the university that I was subject to back before I joined Sheffield Hallam was more of a research bent.
Yeah.
But it was selling its executive education services. And I truly believe that everybody we met on that program was genuinely trying their best. I mean this with there was no ill intent, but to be talked at for an hour and a half was truly horrifying. I couldn't believe it. But I think that it speaks to, so moving it more helpfully into my place, but the world that I'm in, I think that it's a warning to, and I think it does come back to the language of executive education. I think that there is, in a group that should just be working together and getting on with it, that there is a psychological schism, which is probably driven from years of separation, whereby you've got traditionally, not at Sheffield Hallam, we'll stress, I don't think, but there's a warning there that the academics become distant from the business and the business become distant from the academics. And they then fantasize best case scenario and worst case scenario of each other. So an academic will kind of want to work with a business person, but also won't because their ignorance might be exposed. And similarly, the business person might want to work with the academic, but won't because they've been made to look a fool because they don't know half as much as that. They fantasize they don't know half as much as the academic does. So there's this weird, I think, distancing, which I do think is a psychological split born out of defense mechanisms. I will defend myself from working with the other because it's a safer place to be. That's my, Toppenny Worth psychology on the split, and I think that's what was playing out. These people who I experienced, 7 or 8 years ago, it was easier and less risky to talk at us for an hour and a half than just button their lip and say hello, my name is Joe, how are you, let's have a chat. So we've talked a lot about coaching skills here. I think the fundamental coaching call of meeting people as humans, building the connection, getting to know them, putting aside our own worries and anxieties and how will they perceive me and all that ego stuff, and just getting to know them. My background is Gestalt, so getting to know them and creating like a common bond, and then seeing where the relationship can go to from there, and then we can share a bit and they can share a bit. I'll stop talking.
I completely, just sorry to interject again, I completely agree, Vincent, and there is definitely some sort of academic ego that exists. I think it's all to do, when we're struggling with this at the moment, it's all to do with kind of how you position this role. We would call it a academic mentor in our school, but there's always been question marks about academic mentoring, whether that's the right term. So I think the way it's promoted, the recruitment and the selection is really important. And also there are other things, as you know, that will come into play in terms of the operational nuances around workload modeling. And it seems to be, you know, if people have capacity, then they're sort of given these roles and they're not the right people to do the roles. And then somebody made an interesting comment in one of my meetings recently. Said, well, why don't you just recruit more of the professors who've got time on their workload to do this role? And I nearly fell off my chair. That goes back to your point, Andrew. You know, no, these are not the right people at all. Why? Because in a coaching role, you have to be vulnerable yourself. You have to be willing to disclose, and you have to be willing to get to a certain level of intimacy. And the challenge that we've had with some of the individuals that were recruited into the role, which we've subsequently learned are the wrong people, are those people that do have some form of academic ego, is exactly as you said, Vincent. They don't want to be seen. Well, I'm the expert. Do you not know the 4-star papers I've published on this? I'm the expert. And if there is and even if a student in a conversation takes them into a place where there's ambiguity and they're no longer the expert, they literally fall apart. They cannot cope with it at all.
Yeah.
So it's very much about the recruitment and the selection. And I think just going back to the MBA thing, I think if you go to a Russell Group in the United Kingdom to do an MBA, you're not paying for applied, you're paying for the social network. You're paying the £80,000 to be socially networked with people at the top of organisations who are in Westminster and wherever else. No one's going there. I bet nobody turns up to do the bloody modules. You're literally there to wine and dine and sit in the historical halls. When you come down to a post-92 level, which Hallam is like Nottingham Trent is, it's very much about real world. And we very much have exactly the same as Vincent. We have academic practitioners, we have some research, but you wouldn't put those into this sort of coaching facilitation role. And you have people that have don't necessarily have PhDs, because we're not necessarily interested in that. That doesn't show that you're a good coach, you're a good teacher, it shows you're a good researcher. Well, and even that, I suppose, could be questionable. And so we're sort of the same. It's all about how do I attract this? And the biggest challenge we've got as well, Vincent, is how do we reward these people for doing this role? Because in our institution, coaching or this development role or a mentor, whatever you want to call it, has no direct link to any form of promotion. Doesn't get you a publication, doesn't get you any research funding, doesn't necessarily link into the NSS or the PTES. So it's like, where's the incentive for these people to do it, other than their intrinsic motivation to humanize, to see the human side of enterprise, and just to see other people flourish and develop.
But just a note on that, I think coaching and mentoring is such a young discipline, and that's part of the problem with it as an academic discipline, and why I think some people look down at it, is it is quite immature in some ways. And, you know, the sort of internal angst about whether it's coaching and mentoring, I'm almost, you know, like every time you go on some seminar, people go on about, but that's not coaching, or that's not mentoring, but it could be mentoring, it could be coaching. And it becomes, for God's sake, just grow up. Stop being so pedantic.
Yeah, but that's academics for you, though.
I know, but that's the problem with it. That's the problem. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, I mean, I would, just on that academic front, I mean, I've led modules at 2 business schools, and I'm not making this up. The people who are in charge of the entire business programs in marketing, they had never, ever, ever worked in marketing. And so when I said I used to work at Walt Disney, I used to launch films and I used to build adverts, they're like, what? You built advertising? I said, well, yeah, I was a marketing director. And they've never worked. So I think, and I wonder with the coaching thing, I think that's, I thought that, you know, part of the coaching thing has to be surely an empathy. And part of that empathy surely has to be some of your own. I think Vincent mentioned the vulnerability. I mean, I've stuffed up loads of things in my career, and I hope that makes me a better coach. The fact that I upset Madonna is everyone laughs at it because I upset Madonna, but it's a lesson about how not to stuff up your contract and your meeting.
Yeah.
But I think with a lot of this coaching stuff, it is the fact that we've got to be careful that it doesn't become such an academic discipline. But surely, of all the management disciplines, this should be the most human, the most tactical, if you like.
And we're probably lucky in Hallam in that we've got an MSc in coaching and mentoring. We're very closely associated with the EMCC. So in a sense, it's taken years to get there, but nobody in Hallam, certainly in the business school, questions the validity of coaching as a learning or development advice. Look, I'm conscious of time, and I think we need to wrap up now. Although I could happily keep going. Yeah, I want to apologise if I didn't get round to getting to know you at the start, because we only had some time to do all of the introductions. I'm sorry if there's anybody with shortchanged there. Do keep in contact. You got my email, in fact, and my phone number. You practically know where I live. You know I've got a dog. But joking aside, I thought it'd be helpful if I shared back with you what I've got out of the session. Apart from the fact that I've really enjoyed working with you this evening. Thank you. I think I've been reminded of the importance of language and my own feelings around the words executive education. I've been reminded about the importance of I guess when you work in this area, you kind of take it for granted, but coaching is really, really important to hang on to in terms of the vulnerability, the relationship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we would all agree on that. I think there is value in exploring how the standards can impact upon executive education, but there's maybe a bit more work to do on that. And I think that Claudia's pointed towards the end there about honouring the fact that people getting good people in to do these roles in business schools is really, really important, because we don't want people to have bad experiences that put them off education or anything. Yeah. So let's bring it to a close there. You set me a very high bar, because the session before this you said, what was the word? Awesome. Anyway, I hope you found this to be, to use the Winnicott phrase, I hope this one's been good enough. I've certainly found it more than good enough. So thank you very much. Stay in contact through email and whatnot. But let's bring it to a close here. Thanks for a really great conversation.
Thank you, Vincent. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, guys. Wonderful.
Take care.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye, Pearl.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Trio.